From Google SEO Mastermind. Today I wanted to jump on a live video and kind of discuss how search engines work because I feel like a lot of people just don't have a good grasp on it. And thus I wanted to kind of give a overarching understanding of how search engines play an integral role in their indexing and fundamentally search engine optimization. Knowing this information will help you make better decisions with your content, with your websites, and kind of understand the process behind what happens and how Google is working and what they're looking for and what they're doing. And then I'll discuss kind of why the integration of artificial intelligent content has become such a problem and why it's leading to reduced indexing and so forth. So let's just go ahead and start at the top, okay? Let's say we want to create a search engine. We want to pull in queries from a common place or a destination and organize them in a fashion that is good for our users. Okay? The first thing that we have to do is we have to start with what is known as a seed website. A seed website essentially is a website in which we can scrape URLs from that we believe lead to other URLs and so forth. So a lot of search engine optimizers believe that, for example, Wikipedia is a seed website, just because it links to so many places around the different from the internet, and then you can crawl more places from those places. Okay, so we start with a seed website, and this is where we're going to generate all our URLs. The other place that we can grab URLs from is obviously a submittal tool, and we would, more or less call that Google Search Console, GSC, because you can submit your URLs. But either way, you have to get it from one of these two places to find documents that you want to index around the internet. Now, the first thing you're going to have is a total repository. Okay. What this repository does is it collects all the information either through a manual submittal tool or a seed website, and it adds it to a repository. So the repository could have an unlimited amount of documents, right? Well, not unlimited. Obviously, it's going to be dictated by your total server size, how many servers you have, what type of technology you're running, random access memory, and so forth and so on. So in the sense of Google, Google probably has thousands of repositories. It's not just one. They all link together to form one repository, but there's multiple repositories, if that makes sense. Or actually, I should say multiple servers that are conglomerative of a repository, where they aggregate to a repository. Okay, so if you want to see what that would look like, it would be something of the sort. Okay, so you'd have server 1, server 2, okay, so forth and so on. And what they would do is they would all come to your repository, or add to your repository rather. Okay, and they would probably talk to each other as well, but essentially all these servers would be one large repository. Okay, so in addition to a repository, you have to have a way to pull relevant information from the repository. So when somebody Googles something, imagine checking a billion documents at once. It just wouldn't be user friendly. It wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be conducive to creating a really good search engine. So you couldn't go straight to the repository. What you'd want to do is you would want to create an indexer. Okay. And essentially what would happen is this indexer would be a collection of documents from the repository. And the way that it gets the collection of documents is through an algorithmic exchange. Okay. So, excuse me. So let's call this an algorithmic exchange. So let's say there's not a million, there's probably like 1,000 algorithms within the algorithmic exchange. And what it does is it takes documents from the repository and it gives them, it takes documents from the repository and then it filters them through the algorithmic exchange based on algorithms, and then it sends it to the indexer. And the indexer is essentially what gets queried when there is a new search. So let's say Google search engine. Okay. So you have the Google search engine. Somebody comes to Google and they type something in. It is not going to the repository to fetch it. It's going to the indexer that has pulled information from the repository through an algorithmic exchange. Okay. So it makes a lot of sense, right? But in addition to this indexer, there's also barrels. And you know, a lot of people in SEO don't talk about barrels, or they don't know what barrels are. But essentially, barrels are just a way to kind of index your index. So, say somebody types something in, like they want a new recipe for cheesecake, or whatever the case may be. If Google had to come directly to this indexer and look at all the files in the indexer that it has indexed from the repository, it'd still be looking for a lot of things, right? So instead, they have what is known as barrels. And one barrel might be about cheesecake recipes. Can't spell recipes, guys. I'm a horrible speller. I think I got it right. Okay. So one barrel might be cheesecake recipes, and these two talk to each other. And say another barrel is, I don't know, cars, or we'll do something specific, Honda cars. Or I'm sorry, this will be another barrel, barrel 2, Honda car. Okay, and usually these barrels are not going to speak to each other because there's no point for them to, but they do talk to the indexer, and the indexer, oops, and the indexer talks to them. Okay. So, and obviously you're going to have millions of barrels depending on the subject, and it's sorted by entities. The barrels sort by entities, and the indexer queries the barrel because it knows where to look, and the barrel provides the results to the indexer and sends it back to the Google searcher or the browser, more or less, right? So you're going to have tons of barrels, thousands, millions probably, and they're all probably based around entities, okay? So let's think about this from a logistical standpoint. The repository can only have so many servers. Obviously, you can keep adding servers. The indexer is going to have servers. The algorithmic exchange is going to have servers. These aren't going to have servers because you're scraping them. You're just scraping them with your Google crawler to send them to the repository, okay? But all of these different things are going to have servers. The repository, the indexer, the barrels, barrel 2, whatever the case may be. And we're talking, guys, we're talking hundreds of thousands of servers, if not millions at this point for Google. But here's where AI content kind of comes into play, and it's not necessarily a good thing, right? There's only so much physical room in the repository, and there's only so much physical room in the indexer in each individual barrel. So what Google is doing at this point with their search engine is they're saying, we already have enough cheesecake recipes to fulfill the Google search engines or the user's need, right? We already have enough Honda car articles and documents to fulfill the user's need. Things that have been talked about over and over and over again, there's really no reason to keep indexing them unless they're a higher quality content or they provide a better user experience. And the way that that's done, again, is through an algorithmic exchange of what should be pushed into a barrel. So let's say you write a new cheesecake recipe, okay, and you use AI content. If the AI content is scraping from this barrel for cheesecake recipes, then it's just providing information that's already in this barrel, okay? And so what Google does when you send it to the repository, probably through a submittal, especially if it's a new website, it's not going to go through a seed website. What they do is they check the algorithmic exchange through an algorithm to see how close it is to the cheesecake recipe in the barrel that already exists. If it's already close, it's not going to index it, okay? There's no reason to, because the answer and the solution already exists. And even more so, Google can have an algorithmic exchange that's attached to the repository to check to see if there is enough queries in the barrel. You know what I'm saying? So essentially what will happen is you will create a cheesecake recipe, you'll submit it to Google Search Console. Google will process the submittal through an algorithmic exchange, and then it'll send it to the repository if the answer is true. Does this new cheesecake recipe document meet the algorithmic exchange requests to be submitted to the repository? And if the answer is yes, then it'll hit the repository, okay? But then once it hits the repository, it might not necessarily hit the indexer. And then once it hits the indexer, it'll come up in the index. And that's often, guys, why you see, if you use the site modifier in Google and you type site colon and then your website, you might see your websites coming up, or your website documents and pages. They might just be in the repository, but when you try and Google the keywords, they don't come up, which means that the algorithmic exchange has decided that they're not hitting the indexer. And more or less, they can't get to the user. And it's probably because there's already something that's sufficient in the barrel to complete the request. And unless Google crawls it again and says, okay, the algorithmic exchange checks out and the query is true, send it to the indexer, and then they'll put you on page 12 or 14, depending on other algorithms. So, guys, what I just want you to take away from this is there's a whole process going on here. And essentially what Google is doing is they're trying to filter out data and documents and information that is not good, or that is repeated or unnecessary, because there's only so much physical space. If you scrape a cheesecake recipe, or I'm sorry, if you get a cheesecake recipe from AI generated content, there's like a 90% chance that it's scraped, because GTP3 had to scrape the entire internet to understand it. And essentially, if it's scraped, it's not going to necessarily pass the algorithmic exchange. It might not, and then it's not going to make it to the indexer. I know a lot of people will say, well, there's plagiarized content, et cetera, et cetera. The algorithmic exchange for every single niche is different, okay? There's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, servers that are constantly trying to understand if the content that you're producing is good or not based on niche algorithms. So you might have duplicate content in a plumbing niche and it might work. You might have duplicate content in a cheesecake recipe and it might not work because the algorithmic exchange is different. So, like I said, what I want you to take away from this video is that automated content it's hurting kind of our practice, and it's hurting how Google picks up websites, and it's taking away from the unique factors of what makes content good, because GTP3 literally goes across the internet, scraped all the information in the corpora, and then it started making sentences out of sentences that already exist. So essentially, it's not adding anything to Google. It's taking away from it. If you have 1,000 documents that are just regurgitated information of documents that already exist, you're taking up physical space on Google servers to be in the repository, but you're not actually providing anything that's not already provided in the cheesecake barrel. So it's just redundant, okay? I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. I hope this makes sense, guys. It's really late at night, but I wanted to go over this because it's just something that not a lot of people understand. And from a higher level perspective, it gives you an understanding of why Google doesn't want to index some content, whether it be your content, whether it be automated content generated by AI, whatever the case may be. Hopefully, it just gives you a better understanding, and that's really just the intention and the goal in the video. If you have any questions, please drop them below. This is a very basic actually explanation of how this works. There's much more that goes into it, but this should make sense, hopefully, and I will post this picture up, and hopefully you guys can take something away from it. All right, I hope you are having a wonderful Monday. This video should reach you by Monday, so have a wonderful Monday, guys.